Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 326. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. A lot to cover on today's show. I'm getting to some articles I wrote last week and didn't have a chance to get to, and also some of the news that I missed while I was traveling last week. So this will be, I think, a pretty full show and a pretty important show that people want to catch out. A lot of news on Russia to talk about here. If you can support the show, the best way to do that is just by sharing it, put it out there to more people in any way you can. So Facebook, Twitter, whatever you have, throw the show up there when you can. If you're a new listener to the show, think about subscribing to it somewhere. YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version of anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts is on the Libertarian Institute, all podcast feeds. So you're really into foreign policy, this show, Scott Horton's show, Liberty Weekly, and a ton of other great content on that channel. Last way to support the show is by doing your CBD shopping with our sponsor, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com. The promo code is PEACE. That'll save you 20% when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kickback on every purchase that you guys made. So it's a great way to help out the show and get yourself some high quality CBD products. Mentioned it on the show last time, but we were the top affiliate for Paloma Verde in August, and so you guys make that possible. You're the ones out there buying the CBD, and so I just wanted to take this show to ask anybody who bought the CBD to hit me up, myself, Connor, Will Porter. Let us know what you think. We always want to hear what products our audience loves the most, and we always love talking about that on the show. I know recently I've talked to a lot of people who love their CBD dog treats. Older dog that has a little bit of pain, younger dog with a little too much energy or anxiety, those CBD dog treats could be absolutely key to your pup having a great life. So PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. All right, now let's get into the show. So there is a lot in my news roundup today for the Libertarian Institute. The first story is from Netsgov, which I'm pretty certain is just a government-funded website. However, sometimes the reporters that they have are kind of just younger beat-right reporters that write up some pretty interesting stories. This one titled, "The White House Offers State and Local Governments $1 billion in grants directed towards improving cybersecurity." The reason I think this is very important is the more tentacles the federal government has in state and local government cybersecurity, I think the more potential there is for, really Washington, D.C. to have access to more data, more power, and everything like that. But also, as they embed themselves down lower and lower, we always see these stories of different kinds of election interference and meddling in U.S. elections and all of this. I think we're going to see more of this as the government's able to, pick up these local governments. And hell, maybe if you're a local government, you say you have 1 million cybersecurity breaches. Oh boy, the federal government really needs to step in and help out that, your poor local little locality. And so it could, really be a situation where these localities start to inflate their number of cyber attacks or what kind of cyber attacks are coming in to get more money from the government. Maybe the most important thing I have to talk about today, veteran suicides. This from the Military Times. There was a study done that found that veterans may be committing suicides at over double is what the article says, but really it's pretty close to triple what the estimated rate is. So this is what's going on. The Pentagon, the Department of Defense says, look, we have about 17 deaths from soldiers a day, which is a horrifying statistic. 22 a day was the number used a while ago. From talking to people in the military, which I do quite a bit, I have talked to quite a few people who have said the mental health services, particularly with the VA, have gotten better since the mid-Obama years. There was a time where it was a pretty regular occurrence that you would have a vet killing themselves in the parking lot of a VA after being denied service. That I haven't seen stories like that in the past few years, and so that may be an indicator that, look, just as I think the understanding of mental health has improved and some of the stigma behind mental health has broken down, there's been more success there. I think it's cultural. And so, there's been some improvement in maybe the number of soldiers killing themselves, but it turns out that the Pentagon has been really undercounting it. Now, a study was done, and I think it focused on just a couple of southern states. And so it may be that this doesn't extrapolate as much as they're suggesting, but what they say is that the actual rate, if this data is correct, could be up to 44 veterans a day are dying. Now what they are finding is that when somebody kills themselves, right, shoots themselves in the head, very easy, kind of common, those are all counted. But things that are maybe driving incidents, right, like where somebody is going 100 miles an hour, dies in a single car crash, and that may not be counted. Additionally, drug overdoses may not be, are not counted in there. And so all that together means that the number is a lot higher than the Pentagon is estimating. Again, maybe that 44 a day is a little bit over, and but the Pentagon number is 17 a day. But from looking at what that study did, it does seem that the number is quite a bit higher. Moving on to European news, Switzerland will buy 36 F-35s from Lockheed Martin for $5.5 billion. And, an important step for NATO here, this was from the Defense Post. Germany and Spain conducted NATO's first enhanced air policing mission. And so this is just, stepping up the provocations against Russia and everything like that. Now, the first article I wrote that I want to talk about today is for antiwar.com, September 16th. Putin scores several diplomatic victories as West attempts to isolate the Kremlin. And so I think this is a really important article that I have here to talk about on today's show. And that is because if you look at the current narrative in the media, it's all about how Russia is losing this war and the momentum is on Ukraine's side. And look, there is a lot of territory that has been retaken by Ukraine over the past couple of weeks. And that's really important about what's happening on the ground in Ukraine. But as we see, the war, what's going on is much bigger than this. And what the West is saying is that they're going to wear down and grind down Russia. And over the long term, Moscow is going to be isolated. The economy is going to be harmed and all of that. And we're really not seeing any of that happen. So I write, after Russian forces invaded Ukraine in February, Western leaders led by President Joe Biden vowed the Kremlin would face historic isolation that would bring its war machine to a halt and cripple Moscow's economy. However, nearly 7 months into the war, Russia has maintained its economic strength as Moscow has found several partners worldwide. Russian President Vladimir Putin attended a conference of 14 world leaders in Uzbekistan. The countries at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Smartland made over half the world's population and a quarter of the global economy. This is really important, right? So you read this story, and I think 99% of people who in the West who are going to read that, Putin met with 14 world leaders in Uzbekistan for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That doesn't sound important at all. But those 14 countries make up half the world's population, a quarter of the world's economy. These are major countries that are going to have a major say in what's happening in the world. Not only that, this group is expanding. So the SCO is the second largest global body after the UN. Just trying to understand, what we're talking about here, what kind of diplomacy, what it means for Moscow to be able to go out here and have these meetings. As the summit opened, Iran signed a memorandum of obligations to become a full SCO member. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi noted the glowing relationship between sanctioned nations is helping to overcome their problems. He said, the relationship between countries that are sanctioned by the U.S., such as Iran, Russia, and other countries, can overcome many problems and issues and make them stronger. The Americans think whichever country they impose sanctions on will be stopped. This perception is a wrong one. Putin held 2 high-profile bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the SCO summit. First, President Putin met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Xi said Beijing and Moscow would work together to assume the roles of great powers. China is willing to make efforts with Russia to assume the role of great powers and play a guiding role to inject stability and positive energy in a world wrought by social turmoil, the Chinese leader said. The second meeting was with Indian Prime Minister Modi. In his meeting with Putin, Modi discussed the growing ties between New Delhi and Moscow. Relations between Russia and India have significantly improved. We believe they are extremely important. We are friends, and for decades we have always stood shoulder to shoulder, he said. He continues, the whole world is aware of the nature of Russia-Indian relations, and the world is also knows the deep friendship, in particular the personal friendship that ties that bind us. We first met in 2000 when I was in state government in India, and our friendship has only grown ever since. And so this is what Modi is saying to and about Putin. Now, both Modi and Xi raised the issue of the Ukraine war with Putin, but both stopped short of condemning the Russian invasion. In his statements, Putin acknowledged the war in Ukraine, but deflected blame to Kiev and the West, mainly saying, like, look, we could have had a deal done in April, which does seem to be true, but the war is dragging on. Look, that isn't a complete excuse or anything like that, but that was Putin's response, and these two leaders didn't really seem to have an issue with what Putin said here. While the Western press has emphasized Modi's mention of an era of peace, it failed to note the growing economic ties between Russia and India. In just the energy and fertilizer sectors, New Delhi has vastly increased its input of Russian goods over the past 6 months, and I think it's not like 150%. We're talking about like 8 times over, 3 times over for these different exports. And so this is the reason I wrote this article, and the reason I want to focus on this and highlight it so much is this is the exact kind of thing that our Western media gets wrong, and it misleads us, and it sets a narrative that look, even India and China are turning against the Russian war, and that is simply untrue. And the reason Americans need to know that's untrue isn't because I want to push some kind of pro-Putin propaganda. It's because the reality of the situation is India is importing 8 times the amount of Russian energy than they were 6 months ago. And so look, India is not in any way moving away from Russia. India is not in any way going to help the Western isolation or sanctions war against Moscow. And we as Americans need to know that to assess what we're doing, because our media allies with the military industrial complex, the elite in the country, the leaders of our country, our elected politicians, and spin these fictions that help the American narrative, but really do ultimately end up hurting Americans. So that was that article, and again, I thought for a lot of the reasons I highlighted there, it was a really important one. So there is an article I want to discuss here. Conservative groups, including Heritage Action and Conserve Veterans for America, are calling on Congress to reject additional aid for Ukraine. Now, one of the things that I think makes this particularly interesting is that these aren't very obscure groups. Heritage, I think, really represents like the Reaganite foreign policy. Now, I should also mention Kelly Vlahos has a fantastic article, of course, at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft that you should read, because I don't want to suggest in any way that Heritage is turning into realists or doves. And as Kelly explains, they are very aggressive, particularly on the China issue. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, that's Linda Thomas Greenfield, says she has no plans to meet with the Russian officials at a conference of world leaders next week. So that's pretty unfortunate. That's reporting as of right now from Reuters. Of course, things could develop, but my guess is that Thomas Greenfield really isn't involved in any kind of negotiations with Russia. That's kind of happening at different levels. She's been more like in the Middle East and dealing with UN issues. Not, that does have to do with Russia at times, but I really haven't seen her in any kind of direct engagement with Russia so far. Next up is a article from the Libertarian Institute, And this one is important, for a number of reasons, but we'll get into all that here. U.S. and EU will force Turkey to implement sanctions on Russia. Washington and Brussels will pressure Ankara to step up economic war on Moscow, the Financial Times reported on Thursday. Western officials say the Russian economy has been able to weather the Washington-led sanctions blitz partly because the Turkish economy is offering backdoors to Moscow. According to the diplomats, Turkish banks will now be forced to abandon the Russian mirror payment system. And this is something that Russia put together after Russians were unable to use like Visa and MasterCard. This is like the Russian equivalent of Visa. And so if you're a Russian, you can't get Visa, so you get Mir, and Mir is accepted in Turkey, and so you could vacation in Turkey. And what we'll get into is we're turning out that some of the Russians, and I don't want to just bring this all down to vacationing or luxury, things like that, because it gets more important, but that's one of the examples I use here in this article. While a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Turkey has maintained a somewhat neutral position on the war in Ukraine. Ankara's hesitation to adopt the hawkish position held by the rest of the West allowed Turkey to mediate talks which produced the grain export agreement. Under the deal, over 72,000 tons of food products have left Ukrainian ports, and that number I believe was only current through August. And I read a story today in Reuters, I believe it's in the news roundup here, that number is now 3.2 million tons of food have left from that deal. And so that is just how important that the Turkish neutrality has been in this war. There's now 3.2 more million tons of food available to the rest of the world because of Erdogan leading those negotiations, even though it's come at some pretty sharp criticism from his supposed Western allies. Turkey is a NATO member state. Last month, the Deputy Treasury Secretary warned his Turkish counterpart that Russians were attempting to use Ankara's economy as a loophole to escape Western sanctions. The Turkish official responded by stressing Ankara had a profound economic relationship with both Kiev and Moscow. In response to Western sanctions that prevented Russians from accessing services like Visa and MasterCard, the Kremlin rolled out Mir payment systems as an alternative. 5 of Turkey's most prominent banks allow the use of Mir. One of the sources speaking with FT said Western nations would no longer allow Turkish banks to use Mir without incurring risk. We will send a message that is very clear that, for example, third country financial institutions should not be connecting with the Mir payment network because that carries some sanctions evasion risk, the official said. 2 of Turkey's top banks told FT they would enforce the sanctions, and it appears Russians are being impacted. Middle East Eye reports several Russians at Turkish reports had their cards declined. However, it is now a blanket ban at hotels, and Mir card users report being able to access ATMs. This was as of last week, so I haven't read any updates on Mir being more banned in Turkey or less at this point, but it could be more significant at this point. Ankara does not appear willing to institute Washington sanctions targeting Mir. Turkey's foreign ministry said Ankara has a long-standing policy of only enforcing UN-issued sanctions. FT reports the crackdown on sanctions in Turkey is due to the West's economic war in Moscow having failed. The shift acknowledges the sanctions imposed after Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February failed to damage the Russian economy as much as they hoped, that outlet reported. All right. So, moving on here, we now have Turkey saying, and the leader, Recep Erdogan, saying that he hopes Turkey will be in a position to facilitate a diplomatic end to the war soon. On Saturday, Russia pulled back its forces in areas in northeastern Ukraine's Kharkiv region as Kiev made its first significant territorial gains in a counteroffensive. The Kremlin afterwards said that despite Ukraine's gains, they weren't looking at doing a general mobilization. It does seem that Russia has stepped up attacks on infrastructure, power, and things like that have been attacked a little bit more since this counteroffensive has been successful. I think it's somewhat safe to say that the crowd that initially said, just wait, the Russian counter offensive is coming, and this was going to be a massive folly for the Ukrainians. That has not played out as they had tactically talked about, and it appears that Ukraine has retaken quite a large chunk of territory. How long they're able to hold it, if Russia will try to take it back, are questions, and how Russia will respond is all yet to be seen. But it doesn't seem to be the biggest game changer so far in the world war, since I've seen Russia come out with some statements almost, I don't want to say walking back their war objectives, but definitely, really re-stressing the initial ones, which was securing the Donbass and making the area for the Russian speakers safe. Ukrainian foreign minister on Saturday made a fresh pitch for more weapons as Western arms after Ukraine made territorial gains in the counteroffensive. So that's one of the real things going on here. They're saying that, oh well, because the counteroffensive happened, now we really have to push this because Ukraine has the momentum. And I'm sure that one of these days it will be discussed if this war doesn't go 100% the way the West wants, that had the U.S. pushed it more now, it would have made a big difference. This from Reuters and Defense Post. Germany will give Ukraine 2 additional multiple rocket launcher systems, as well as a slate of other weapons. However, the particular tanks that were requested by Kiev to Berlin were not delivered and were not amongst that weapons package. We have a new $600 million weapons package being announced, and I will try to do a breakdown on that later in the week. Next up is a story from Dave DeCamp that I think is very important, so I want to take a second and really go through this article. Russia warns longer-range U.S. weapons for Ukraine would cross a red line. The Russian Foreign Ministry warned the U.S. against providing Ukraine with longer-range missiles, saying that doing so would cross a red line and make Washington a party to the conflict. Now, I think for people keeping track at home, this isn't the first time that Russia has said that the U.S. doing something would make it a party to the conflict. And I think Russia has already, pretty rightfully so, labeled Washington a party to this war. But I think they're trying to say here that, look, this would be a significant escalation. The warning comes after it was revealed Ukraine asked the U.S. to provide the army with tactical military systems, ATACMS, which have a range of about 190 miles, significantly further than any U.S. weapons provided to this point. And so these particular weapons can be fired from the HIMARS rocket launch systems that the U.S. has already sent to Ukraine. HIMARS that Ukraine are currently using are equipped with munitions that could hit about 50 miles away. All right. Next up here, the Treasury Department on Friday issued preliminary guidance for the G7 to implement price caps on Russian oil. We'll see how this develops. My real guess is that these price caps never materialize because I think it's just going to do too much damage economically. But that's a pretty big hope that the Biden administration cares enough about the American economy that they won't crash it and destroy it in an effort to harm Russia here. So, and on that, Dave DeCamp has a story talking about the European Union backing off its plan somewhat because the continent is so divided on the issue. And then my last story here on Russia today is about expanding the grain deal. I wrote this one at the Libertarian Institute on September 13th. The United Nations is pushing to include a key product in fertilizer within the deal that allows Moscow and Kiev to export grain through Ukrainian ports. A Western diplomat said explaining the grain agreement to include ammonia from Russia could stabilize the grain deal. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently criticized the export deal because food products were going to wealthy companies over wealthy countries that have sanctioned Moscow versus low-income countries. So some of the food, I believe, has gone to Lebanon, Syria, etc. Most of the food is going to other countries that, again, have put sanctions. And even the Turkish president agrees with this. And remember, Turkey is a NATO member. So now the West is trying to expand the deal to include ammonia because they think it will help keep Russia within the agreement. Now moving on to a couple stories about China. The U.S. is pushing China not to back Russia in the war in Ukraine. This seems like a pretty futile thing, but the U.S. continues to have this ridiculous policy of setting standards for countries they know they won't meet, and it basically ensures that the relation between Washington, whatever country is, in this case Beijing, is essentially destroyed in perpetuity. Next up, we have drones in the Taiwan Strait. I believe for the first time they are crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait. Dave DeCamp has the write-up here at antiwar.com. Taiwan's defense ministry confirmed for the first time the China's People's Liberation Army, the PLA, has sent drones over the median line, the unofficial barrier that separates the two sides of the Taiwan Strait that was drawn by the U.S. in 1955. The South China Morning Post reported on Sunday, and we are really seeing that this is the new standard, the new status quo for the Taiwan Strait. This was provoked by Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in August. China has sanctioned the heads of weapons makers. I believe it's Raytheon and the CEO of Boeing Defense. And Turkey will seek membership in the China-led Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I think actually, this came out the day or two after I wrote that initial article about Putin's, victories on the global stage. However, I think this actually adds to and enhances that. If Turkey is joining the SCO, that's going to give Putin and Erdogan another forum for conversation. Fighting has resumed in Nagorno-Karabakh. About 200 people have died so far, according to what I have been reading. I haven't been studying this close enough, as well as the fighting going on between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. I know nothing about the legacy of this conflict, but I'm reading today that it's 81 deaths in Tajikistan, saying 35 civilians have so far been killed. In Afghanistan, the Taliban say travel restrictions are ineffective and create distance between Kabul and Washington. I think the Taliban is probably right on this, and it's pretty true. The Taliban claimed to kill 40 rebels. I believe this was in the Panjshir Valley area, and so my guess is that these were the rest of the resistance. I don't think that this was in Nangarhar or the ISIS-K guys. And then a border crash broke out between Afghanistan and Pakistan, resulting in multiple fatalities. The Taliban say Pakistan was attempting to build a new outpost. The Pakistan blamed the attack on terrorists. I don't even think they said that the Taliban were behind. They just said terrorists in general. I think they meant militants. But if the Taliban are saying that they were fighting against Pakistan, I think they might be honest about that. I'm not sure. All right, moving on to news about Syria here. At Russia's urging, Syria and Turkey's top intelligence officials held several meetings. One of the reasons that this is important is if we look at the balance of power in Turkey, I think essentially right now have the Assad, which is Iran, the Shia militias, Hezbollah, Russia, all aligned on one side, and then you have the American side that we occupy Syria east of the Euphrates River. We bat the Syrian Kurds as well as a few other Arab militias here and there. But then the major groups of Arab militias, these are mostly the jihadists, but probably some non-jihadists as well mixed in there. And these are groups backed by Turkey, and it seems that Russia is trying to push both Ankara and Damascus to realize that they should address the American and the Kurdish situation first, I guess, before trying to resolve the fighting between Damascus and Idlib, where most of the Turkish-backed jihadists are. ISIS killed 7 U.S.-backed Kurdish SDF fighters on Monday as part of an ongoing operation at a camp that houses former ISIS fighters. That is the Al-Hol camp. And just today I read a report from the New Arab that those operations have finally ended. The Kurds announced an end to the 3-week-long operations inside the Al-Hol prison camp in U.S.-occupied Syria. Dozens of women were arrested with alleged links to the Islamic State. I read that they claim a total of 200 people were arrested. There's a lot of murders that go on in these camps. What happened is it was supposed to be like a temporary refugee camp and turned into a massive sprawling prison for tens of thousands of people surrounded by a massive refugee camp of tens of thousands of more people. So it's an absolute train wreck and humanitarian disaster in Al-Hol. It's all in the U.S. To find some solution to it, since it is U.S. occupied Syria. But none of that is happening. It just seems that they sent in some of their Kurdish thugs to turn the place over and, claim at least that some of the people they arrested were members of ISIS, which, may even carry a death sentence and probably not a pretty legitimate trial. And this is a report said from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. It says Syria was bombed by Israel 25 times so far in 2022, killing a total of 27 soldiers and injuring 23 civilians. A couple of stories here on Israel and the rest of the Middle East. Israel seized or destroyed 44 Palestinian structures in the West Bank. And then that was reported by the New Arab. My other article from this weekend at antiwar.com was on the massive new aid package the U.S. is giving Jordan. White House announces massive $10 billion aid package for Jordan. The Joe Biden administration rolled out a new assistance agreement with Jordan. Washington will send Amen $10.15 billion over the next 7 years. The new deal will make Jordan the third largest recipient of American aid, following only Ukraine and Israel, although Taiwan might have something to say about that soon. The White House signed the new Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, on Friday. The Joe Biden administration first discussed the new agreement with Jordan on the sidelines of the Jeddah Summit in July. The MOU is the largest aid package the U.S. has ever signed with Jordan. Jordanian officials celebrated the aid and claimed it was essential. It is an extremely important MOU. It speaks to the strong relationship the two countries have. The U.S. has gone above and beyond for Jordan, the foreign minister said. The State Department stressed Jordan's strategic importance to America's foreign policy goals in the Middle East. The MOU represents a major commitment to Jordan's stability and the durability of the strategic partnership. While the U.S. sees Jordan as an important player in the Middle East, Washington and Jordan do not see eye to eye on Syria policy. Jordan recently endorsed the Russian presence in Syria as stabilizing. Some of the aid will help Jordan manage the 1.3 million Syrian refugees, and of course the Syrian reconstruction effort is being delayed because of American sanctions on Syria. The MOU that grants Jordan over $10 billion in aid from U.S. taxpayers was signed even though the State Department claims Jordan's monarchical government commits disturbing human rights abuses. According to the State Department, Jordan consistently committed major violations of human rights. And then this is from the 2021 Human Rights Report. Significant human rights issues included credible reports of torture or cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment in government facilities, arbitrary arrest and detention, political prisoners or detainees, arbitrary or unlawful interference with privacy, serious restrictions on free expression and media, including the existence of criminal libel laws and censorship. Like Jordan, and by the way, this is was just news story out from Middle East. I read it a couple hours before I record this show. Apparently, Jordan, right after they got that U.S. aid, turned around and started cracking down on dissent in their country. Like Jordan, other top recipients of American aid have tarnished human rights records. Israel receives $3.8 billion from the U.S. annually and is accused by Western NGOs of being an apartheid state. Egypt will take in over $1 billion from the U.S. in 2022, and several representatives, U.S. legislators, believe Cairo is guilty of carrying out extrajudicial killings. The top recipient of U.S. aid, Ukraine, has nationalized its media and banned nearly all political opposition parties in the past 6 months. So, it may sound ridiculous that the U.S. is giving $10 billion to a monarchy, but it's really not that ridiculous as, the other states we give money to do usually far worse things. All right, last thing I am going to cover here on the show today. Al-Qaeda's Yemen wing has been hitting the Southern Transitional Council separatists in southern Yemen in recent weeks. Indications are that the deals taking pressure off the STC elsewhere may allow them to refocus. This is, I think, probably a move that is best explained by the split between Saudi Arabia and the UAE in Yemen. While they are on the coalition along with the Americans against the Houthis, the AQAP, the jihadists, tend to work alongside the UAE, and I'm not sure exactly if Saudi Arabia is backing the STC, but from my understanding, the STC is more along with the southern Yemeni government, and so they, find themselves, I guess, against the jihadists more often than not, backed by the UAE. But I'm not sure why all that's playing out right now in Yemen. That's just some of my speculation. All right, again, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in. More shows later this week. Of course, Connor Freeman coming back to talk about Iran, lots of other stuff. Please subscribe, donate, recommend the show. Pull them up, verdecbd.com, promo code PEACE. Follow me on Twitter at Anzalone _. Thanks, everyone.